Here, so welcome everyone. This session is on the power of open source. And what that means, they're going to tell you. And I'm not even going to try to introduce people today because they are better at introducing themselves and each other. And they got great slides about it. Gentlemen, your slides are working right. You were able to share the screens. You don't have to now, just making sure you got it worked out. Perfect. Fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mics and the videos over to Mr. Tim Serewicz, I think I got it right, and Paul Nathan from CIQ and Tim's from Linux Foundation. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt. Well, hey, I'll give a quick intro. I think, Paul, you're on the slides, but my name is Tim Serewicz. I'm the director of the training program for Linux Foundation. What that basically means is I'm responsible for all of our content. We have 130 e-learning courses, 20 instructor-led courses. I'm responsible for an instructional design team where we make stuff like courses. Also responsible for all of our trainers. We have trainers, direct as well as contractors in a ATP network around the world. And I write our Kubernetes courseware and our quantum computing courses, among other stuff. So that's kind of the 30-second elevator pitch for me. Paul?
Yeah, so I am an ordinary software engineer. I work for Control IQ. I'm one of the senior principal engineers there. And I do a little bit of everything, I think, at this point. I think the only thing I really haven't gone into is the kernel debugging for CIQ. My career has been on doing tools and call it DevOps, DevSecOps in the commercial sector for who knows how many years, wide range of different companies and industries. So I'm going to be leading off this slide and discussion today.
Hey, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Can you scoot your microphone a little bit closer? A couple people are having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm very sorry. Let's see here. How's that?
Yeah, that's louder for me, so I hope it is for them too. Thank you.
There we go. All right. So I'm going to talk about DevSecOps, my understanding of it, my influence, personal history from my career. I'm more than welcome to try and answer questions from the chat, questions from Tim, questions from Matt. I don't like just being, as it were, the sage on a stage, as some might call it. I like having a good talk with people and sharing what I know and learning from others. So, no further ado, I'm going to take it away. So, power of open source. I'm going to make the gratuitous assumption that everyone's heard about open source. They roughly know what it is. But actually, things like Istio and Kubernetes are open source. And that is a silent acknowledgement of the power of open source to deliver results. So I'm going to pause periodically, take a look at the chat. Right?
Hey, Paul, I'm going to jump in real quick because I will be that guy for anyone else that doesn't want to speak up. Can you give us a 60-second what is open source for those that don't know?
Sure. So open source roughly is the concept of developing software with a license that allows other people to read the source, that is to say the book is open, observe it, make their own modifications and continue. Within the open source world, different licenses exist. Some of these allow you to take open source project, deliver as your own. And then other licenses mandate that the modifications you make, you must release along with your software in some form. So it's an open book to the source code. Ultimately, what I found in my career is that results are what matter to corporations, the commercial sector. So the licensing questions, interestingly enough, are a little bit less sharp than one might expect naively, because at the end of the day, everyone just wants their software to work and to deliver, in my case, profit. In your case, I think the term is an effective and an efficient mission. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So I've been using it in my entire professional career, from Perl early on and Mercurial system, which was a peer to the Git source control system, to today where CIQ is so enmeshed in different open source areas, it's very hard to even say what firmly, well, we have a closed source product, but outside of that, it's all very much enmeshed in the open source world. For DevSecOps in particular, on the conference's title, open source tools exist. One of the things I'm going to be harping on a little bit is that it's not just about the raw tool, it's about the culture and the process and the broad understanding of how do you deliver results. And at some level, it's about pivoting to a new way of working. Uh-oh, there we go. That's the right slide. That slide got moved. How confusing. So when you're looking at adopting open source, one way to think about it is a change accelerator, because you're not looking at, say, a new release of, I'm gonna pick on Windows every 3 years. Maybe there's patches and Patch Tuesday or what have you with Microsoft, but ultimately it's a very slow rate of upstream, that's a term we use, change. So you wind up having a rapid pace of change. So there's new features, there's defect fixes, there's obsoleted dependencies. Some of this does not, by the way, differ from closed source or traditional approaches. If you're not, however, changing, we can have some security issues. For instance, every time, say you're holding to, your favorite version of Windows and you're not patching because you're very confident with that lack of change, there's going to be a line of security CVEs, vulnerabilities that just start stacking up against that unchanging version, which increases risk. I see the chat. Yeah, a gentleman is commenting about Windows releasing new builds. When we were in a Windows shop, when I was in a Windows shop, we would update Windows several years after the latest major point release. We didn't do minor point releases. Different places, different experiences. So the reality is the world is changing rapidly. So we build processes to accelerate change, to manage change, to handle change. So you wind up building a system that says, okay, change happened, let's adapt, let's move. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see integrating in open source into an organization. Again, this commercial lens, very commercial, very industry lens. Other industry, other groups may vary, right? Y'all are typically, if I understand correctly, all DoD, so your approach is going to be different, and that's fine. This is how I see it. So you have to, in order to integrate open source into the org, you need to be prepared to move at the speed of open source. A couple products here are talking about SBOMs. Often these today are aligned with the tool called SigStore, which is today present around the ChainGuard company, which is in production, and that is, let's call it 18 months old. That is pretty fast change, actually, even for established industry. Rocky Linux, something that CIQ supports, was announced in late 2020, released mid 2021. So some plays you can take to manage this. You have to find tooling that works for you. So if the developers are just dropping weekly releases, maybe that's actually a little bit too change heavy for you. Or if they do it once every 2 years, maybe it's too slow. Find the tooling and the process of the open source project that allows you to deliver what you need for your needs. Then you need to implement, it's relatively straightforward, but you need to build a security operations process. You pull in the latest upstream, you qualify it, and then you release it to your users. And conventionally, this would involve some sort of staging environment, some sort of ephemeral environment. There's tooling and a grief around that you have to work through. So it goes, it's the work. Then once you found your tools and you want to be adopting them and integrating them into your system, one of the more effective plays, particularly for large organizations, is to find representatives to engage with the open source community. Community is a little bit of a vague word here. Let me break it down. This is often independent developers, contractors, companies who are helping work at it, as well as other governmental organizations. And by becoming an active stakeholder, you can help influence how the projects are proceeding. This is a common representation of a DevSecOps process. And roughly everything here has 1 bajillion, I approximate, options for each stage in this pipeline, in this model. This is part of why we start seeing the standardization of the software factory packages that Nick was talking about in the previous session. I think that was Nick, where you say, okay, there's all this software, that's all great, fine and dandy, let's just get the job done, just pick me some stuff and go. Tool list. You may have heard of some of these. I strongly support that approach where you're saying we just got to, this is what every company has to do. This is what we got to learn. This is what we have to do. Let's deliver on it. I put together this slide before I saw the slides from the other talks. Again, this is harkening back to what was previously discussed. You have to work through this. So you update on schedules. Maybe you update on CVEs. Failure modes. And this is one we've stepped into. I imagine there's some really hilarious, frustrating, upsetting war stories, as we call them, when you never update until a critical patch hits, and then everyone is all hands on deck to try and get the thing working. So the approach here might be something like you're using a DevSecOps system. You've got to define your environment, and I'm using that word. It's a place to launch your software. Could it be virtual machines? Could it be a separate cloud account? Could it be a physical machine? Could it be a embedded device? It depends. You deploy it, you test it in an automated fashion. See here. No, it's a couple slides ahead. In an automated fashion, you'll go through this workflow of understanding what is really going on, allowing you to confidently have an assessment of the capability of your proposed update. You want to be able to, one of the things I've done is say, okay, let's update on a schedule, quarterly schedule. Most organizations have a policy on, hey, if there is a security vulnerability that's bad enough, we are going to update now. From a security perspective, often it's a more, let's call it a more transparent security update practice. If these security patches are typically delivered by maintainers, if you are particularly interested in making sure your system is up to date, you can contract with groups to deliver patches. There is a broad theory that if you have enough people involved in a project, there will not be very many hard bugs. All bugs are shallow. That is to say, they're easy to fix. That's not really true. There's been some really deep bugs that have been laying undiscovered for years. But on the other hand, there's lots of bugs that are picked up. It is an understood truism that tends to hold true. Open source also, because of its public nature, has a really, really strong incentive to patch fairly quickly, because otherwise it gets very embarrassing. They come in and say, hey, you have a security vulnerability, and no one does anything about it. That's really embarrassing. So it tends to deliver patches quicker, which, again, this is an argument for having your own DevSecOps process for quick releases. So there's the phrase you might say is harnessing a large community. What's interesting often to government groups is there are certifications of certain software packages. OpenSSL, for instance, which is a well-known security library, I'm just going to leave it there. It does a lot of things, probably too many, but it does have a FIPS 140-2, that's the old version, certified configuration. Rocky Linux, the group which is involved with the company I work for, has a STIG system, which is certain security advisories, and other people at my company know far more. Y'all may actually know far more about STIGs than I do. Some Linuxes have a SBOM system. I was talking to a coworker yesterday, and some have it all the way from the power on voltage on your computer all the way up to certain packages with so you have a full chain of trust. And I know that that's starting to move into the container space as well. SE Linux in particular is a authorization system that's been implemented for sensitive information. Not my field of expertise, actually, so I don't want to talk about that too much. I'll embarrass myself. That'd be bad. You can, in your automated toolchain system, use things like SonarQube, which scans source code, Privy, which can do container scans. So we're talking about Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes runs on containers. Nothing runs in Kubernetes without a container. What happens if the container you're using relies on some source code that someone built a year ago? There's 10 CVEs about it. You need a container scanner. Okay, there's a container scanner. Privy is one of them. There are others, and quite frankly, I think there's new ones coming around every couple months, and things merge and rename and so forth. So there is a lot of change in that place. SigStore for SBOMs, as I mentioned. So what you start seeing here is you wind this holistically together is we're shifting, the phrase is shifting left. So this is my left. Shifting left, the cost of integration, right? The more we go right, the closer we get to final release. And at final release time is the worst time to do a full security review and audit. You want to catch issues as early as they occur so that the cost of remediation is as small as possible. So you want to fix fast, fix easy, fix early. So you don't have to say, well, now we have to do a whole review and rework, and it slows everything down. The integration is the worst time to fix major issues. So within this process, as you start moving all these qualifications earlier and earlier, you actually reduce time of rework. The net time of rework goes down. The net time of the net hassle goes down as well. So I want to talk through a few example processes, and I'm going to start referencing tools. You will have your own process. Different teams will have different processes. These are ones from my experience. And just check the chat real quick. Play. You define your process. You define your measurements for improvement. There's always something to improve. Then you execute on it, and then you improve it. There's a phrase, you can't improve what you don't measure. But the other side of that is the only thing, or the thing that gets measured is what gets improved. People move to fulfill the incentive. Modern tools, I'm picking three open source tools: Jenkins, Airflow, and Argo. You can implement those, process those code. What does your process require? You implement it. What does a release process look like? I can talk through some of that if there's interest and we have time. I like, at a code level, Git flow. Just pull in a standard process. Then you need to figure out, how do you say, what do people need? What do you really need to get the job done? Not what is perfect, what do you need? And that, the term for that is satisficing. And this also brings to bear questions around culture. How much can you change? How much are people wanting to change? I'm going to pause just a little bit for questions. We are some 20 minutes in, 22 minutes in. So I just want to hang one moment here to see where we want to take the talk.
Like, we got a question in the Q&A. If you're able to see that.
Let me see. There's a lot of windows going on here.
Yeah, well, and
It's a different window.
And
Okay,
Paul,
I see a question from TS. All right.
Yep, I'll read you the main question. It says, you can read the context in the beginning, but the main question is, are there DoD resources, examples, training, etc., that help us set common understanding of which open source licenses we can use and interpretation guidance, specifically across DoD org context, from labs to operational?
I don't have an answer to that. I'm sorry to say. I would like to believe someone has a very definitive answer to that. But I'm sorry to say, I don't know. I'm going to keep my eye open on the chat. It might be a good answer.
And TS, I see your question. TS, if you can, if you send me a direct message here in the chat under Matt Denny or Mohawk Matt, I know a couple people that can get to you. I don't want to give their name until I make sure, but I think they've got, there are some of these lists of resources that exist. And so I can try to share what we can or what I can find for you to help with that answer.
Great question. I really wish I could answer it.
If there's no others, Tim, do you want to jump in and we'll take questions as they come?
Yeah, I'm happy to take questions. I don't have an answer to it either. I was like, gosh, that would be handy. I'm sure it exists, but I just don't know where. So I'm in the same boat as Paul.
We got a couple of folks that are putting links in the chat, so that may help people. I think it looks like it is related. So thanks, Rob, and thanks, Gerald. Tim, back to you.
Well, I think Paul has a couple more slides. I don't want to step on his time.
Yeah, I'm gonna roll through a couple example processes. I'm gonna go to a couple web app ones and then a firmware one, just to mix the game up a little bit. And if people have seen these, that's cool. You can check out, but just to kind of holistically discuss what I'm talking about in a very concrete way. I'm a software writer. I help people write software. I help define this stuff. This is what I'm talking about. You push a thing, a new thing, then you define what your scans are. So you can scan for linting, compiling, you scan for security issues, you build it, you put it in an artifact registry, you start doing artifact scans. So jars, binaries, container images, verify your SBOMs. There's actually security tools that can assess binaries for risks. There's dynamic ones and static ones. I don't have any names off the top of my head, I'm sorry. Then you can do a deploy. You scan on deploy and verify things like port scans. That tends to not be necessary with Kubernetes, but not everything's Kubernetes, it turns out. Does your deployment work? Does your integration work? If you're feeling aggressive, you can do sort of red team work if you have a staging environment you're deploying into, so forth and so on. I see your question about the new zero trust strategy. I don't have a clear answer to that. I believe that's being driven through Istio systems, which would be integrated around the deploy world. Istio is open source. That's frequently used in zero trust service mesh systems. Often we start dealing with observability here. Because you want to know what's going on in your system. So then you can start, as you're part of your process, you don't just want to drop something and run away. You get a beer, you want to know something went wrong. So you push your code, you instrument, you part of your build, you instrument bring up time, and then there's a wide variety of metrics and logs and other information about a live system that you can track and trace. And this goes all the way from the conventional performance and web app stuff to some very esoteric security analysis of live systems that I remember some of the professors in college doing research on 20 years ago. I'm sure that's in the product by now. So, what's your time point? Do I want to talk about firmware? I do not want to talk about firmware. I'm going to put a slide of the company I am shilling for. This is our product line. Very good. And I can pause it once again for questions and discussion. And then Mr. Timothy is going to take over.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Paul. If any questions come through, hopefully they do. I know it takes a minute to find the mute button every so often. Yeah, if you can go ahead and advance one slide for me, if you don't mind. Okay, so kind of why open source? It's a very common question. I work for the Linux Foundation, and we're all about open source. Something in the range of 850 or so open source projects underneath our umbrella. We're kind of a foundation of foundations now. Linux being a big part of it, of course. But the question or the retort I usually return with is, well, why does freedom matter? Why does anybody want to be free? And not, there's the argument I hear about free speech as distinct from free beer. Is it stuff or is it knowledge? Is it a presentation? And for the most part, it's free speech, not as much the free beer part. There's times that you can get stuff for free, and then that's kind of what the Linux Foundation does. We give away a lot of stuff for free. So shameless plug of my free courseware that you can find, that we give away full courses just to support open source. But the idea is really it's about agility, and whether that's business agility in kind of the corporate sense, or in the government and DoD sense, they don't really like agility. It's really still fighting last war, where, hey, we need tanks in Eastern Europe right now, and people are like, no, what about drones? And oh, no, that's silly talk. But a smart warfighter is an agile warfighter. And that's really what we are talking about in addition to business agility. With a single vendor software, big organization, if there's a bug, you can go to them and say, hey, we found a bug, and oh, thanks very much, we'll get to it when we get to it. That might be tomorrow, if you're really big, or it might be 24 months to never if you are a not so big customer of theirs. So you're stuck with this bug. Same thing with features. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice if we had a button that did this particular thing, or that tied into something like zero trust or an SBOM and so forth? Wouldn't that be handy? You can add those features. So with open source, it's not so much a dollar and cents issue, although, there's a lot of studies on this, that you still have to pay for developer time. You still end up paying a certain amount of money. Your total cost of ownership, so some MBA terms, your return on investment in total cost of ownership, TCO for your ROI, it's about the same when you add it up. I think it's like 5% different. So we're 5% cheaper than a single vendor product that you're locked into. So it's not necessarily a money issue as much as it does what you want it to do when you want it to do it, and you can fix things as necessary. It's also a huge freedom from lock-in. So a lot of times when you purchase into something, you're kind of stuck. And that long tail, vendors that sell you those lock-in products, they like it. Like, well, we got this person for 20 years. And if year 5, oh, look, all the license fees tripled, you're still stuck. And that's why they only have, some number of years of fees written down, because they know that you're going to be stuck, you're well invested, and you can't go anywhere. So part of the reason that open source is so powerful is you have that freedom. You can go other places, you can do other things, you can fork it and do it your own way. So if the community, for whatever reason, doesn't happen to move in the direction that you'd like, you're not beholden to them. Whereas if a single vendor product says, oh, we're going to go left and you want to go right, you're stuck. You either find a new vendor or retool everything, or you go where they decide, that one VP someplace decides. So really it's about freedom, is why open source is gaining so much traction in business and in other places as well. It's about agility. It's about keeping up with whether it's a business need or a threat, if you're talking about kind of a warfighting situation. It is secure, not perfectly secure, but typically, and of course it depends. We have a lot of open source software out there. It's not perfect, but unlike proprietary OS, where bugs and breaches might lay unseen and unfound, there's some pretty high profile businesses that have hid known issues because they just didn't want to talk about it or fix it, and that caused serious issues. With open source software, as Paul mentioned, it's an open book. We're all looking at the source code, and people will comb through it, and they will find something. Hey, this is an issue. Then we all know about it. Okay, we have a 0th day exploit, but we can jump on it, and we can start fixing it. It's that whole daylight is the best antiseptic. We can cure these issues when we know that they're there. It's not that it's perfect. We've had bugs. It's not that Linux is without it. I mean, do we suffer as much as, let's say, Windows box? Well, I'd like to think that we're better off, but it's not a perfection. It's that we're better and fewer of these issues. And when it comes to fixing it, unlike a single vendor company that may only have, if you're lucky, 50 engineers that might be able to solve it, and they need to sleep at night at least a little bit, that you might have thousands of people working on it in an open source community. And some of those thousands of people are incredibly gifted, which means that your fixes and solutions typically will come faster as well. And now, at first open source was the underdog, and now it's the kind of the sleek, shiny object a lot of people go towards. That does mean that it does attract attention. It also attracts some of the best of the best. And when that happens, I always like to be with the movers and shakers, the thought leaders, the engineers that are amazing. As a result, it is attracting that talent. And if those people going into government DoD work, that a lot of times there was that whole, well, this isn't the real battlefield. This is just our demo. So we train one way and then we perform another one. We have different tooling. Everything's distinct. Well, with open source, because of the cost, because of the ubiquity of it, it means that when you step in, you start your training sequences, it is the same thing you're going to see eventually. So we have that combination of the above, and all of this wraps into that open community working together. So Paul, if you can forward me one more slide there. Thank you. Now, one of the things that I always like to mention, and this, if you ever find an old grenade, we don't juggle them. I know that just makes sense, but this is what legacy apps are becoming. So Kubernetes, the cloud microservices. So these are decoupled transient microservices. This is the way of the future, and I could spend an hour telling you about why this architecture is important. It is not just the containerization of an existing app. This is one of the biggest issues People think, oh, I have this wonderful app. It's running Fortran. We've had it for 20 years. We'll containerize it, and bingo, bango, we're done. That is not the way it works. Kubernetes in the cloud fundamentally is a different architecture, meaning it is a series of transient, you're going to kill it all the time, decoupled, they don't and can't rely on one another, microservices. Now, how micro it is, it kind of depends. The easy way of putting it is most people are used to making city buses and Formula One race cars. So good for moving people in a really fast car that only goes on a racetrack. We want scooters. All those little scooters you see everywhere in town, falling over the sidewalks, that's what a microservice is. One's broken, you walk to the next one. This is a different architecture. It's a different way of getting the people around a city. It's a different way of deploying your applications. As a result, over time, as more things go to the cloud, your legacy apps, these are ticking time bombs that are sitting there, and you don't want to mess with an old grenade. You should be careful with a fresh grenade, of course, but it's even worse when you say, well, gosh, how long has that primer been there? And, I hope that's a dummy. I hope that's a test or a smoke, but who knows? If it's a frag, you don't want to juggle it. This is what legacy apps are becoming. And with open source, and the power of that, we want to get away from these closed source legacy apps. There's only 4 people in existence that know how it works, and none of them work for us anymore. Now, with everybody speaking the same language, with the same view, with the same tooling, we can re-engineer, rebuild, and move forward together into this microservice architecture that the cloud takes advantage of. And that's what we want to move towards. So legacy apps are something that I'm seeing so often right now that it's seen as a sunk cost. We'll just make it work. But with the power of open source and with people knowing the technologies and the technologies changing themselves, keeping up with that becomes an essential part of that. And of course, yes, use, if it's my analogy, feel free. Otherwise, use the other one as well. So one more slide there for me, Paul. Okay, and then this is another thing that those of you, depends if you're trying to hire people or you want to get hired, hiring people right now, and for the last several years, has been quite difficult. Poaching on LinkedIn has become an art form where just as you think you found somebody, they get snatched away by better options, more pay, shinier, whatever, the sleeker it is. So as a result, a lot of organizations are realizing that they can't hire their way to success. There's always a gamble as well when you do that. And it's much better if instead of just saying, well, we're going to hire into these solutions, that you start to train your way to that. Your existing human capital, if you can still handle the person, you're probably better off than the unknown. So, and this is where the Linux Foundation does well. We are a neutral organization, so we don't choose winners, and we're also not trying to sell you hardware. So a lot of other organizations out there, training is just an add-on or a bonus or a way to get you into the room so they can sell you something else. That we're trying to sell you hardware, we're trying to sell you some license. We're not that way. So we offer things like boot camp, where you can take 5 or 6 classes, a couple of our practical certification exams, and then prove you know something. We offer these e-learning and instructor-led training options. And one of the things that I always like to mention is wherever you get your education, whether it's from the Linux Foundation or somebody else, remember that edutainment is not the same thing as education. Now, what does that mean? A lot of people think that if they watch a YouTube video once, 5, 10 times, they've learned something. Well, I think we can all guarantee you that if you asked, what happened at the second act break in the 3rd episode of, Downton Abbey, I don't know. I didn't really watch it for that. I wasn't paying attention. Watching something, ending, saying, well, that was happy. I didn't have to do anything. You also didn't learn anything. So as you look at your education, did I get something out of it? Can I use it? Is it functional for me? Because otherwise it's a little bit like game theory. You pretend to teach me, I pretend to learn, both of us don't have to do very much, and we're both happy. So you want to look at these options that you have some sort of, is there a quiz? Is there a test? Is there a functional part of it? Is there a lab exercise that I can easily use and test it? Are they going to show me how to do that stuff? Now, we do that as well with instructor-led, which I'm a fan of. As much as we have technology, and Zoom is amazing, mostly, we're not that far from the ancient campfire where we learn from one another. And one of the tribe would say, don't eat that mushroom, it will kill you. And we learn from it. And if not, well, we didn't make it. So we are still people and we still need other people. So instructor-led training will still be your very best way of communications from one to another, which again, I'm a fan of e-learning. One of the things to keep in mind is that we all learn differently. So I would, if it was up to me, I would say instructor-led, see what we can fill in. And then let's use the agility of e-learning where we have combinations of videos for people that do need to hear it 7 times and the text that, that the different sensory part of the brain that actually rewires it, and the demonstrations and then lab exercises so they get to do it, because we all do learn differently and we want to bring everybody up to a particular baseline of functionality, being able to use that software. Whether it's the software is to do something, turn a light on, turn it off, or in a cybersecurity where we're dealing with asymmetric attacks and we have to understand our finite systems really well in order to compete and combat the attacks that we're undergoing. And a big part of how do I know this, look at certification. So one of the things that the Linux Foundation is well known for are these practical certifications. For 2 hours, you're staring at a prompt, and you have 18 or so bullet points you need to do, and no Google or Stack Overflow. You have to know it. If you can make it through that kind of little cauldron, chances are you can do it on the job, and that's definitely a good thing. It's become very valued along with our digital badges, because when you try to get a job, and this will come as news to most of you, but sometimes HR isn't technically savvy, and so they're going through a lot of resumes and CVs to see who do I hand to the hiring manager. So they're looking at 200 apps. Which one of these do I hand up? Not all 200, and digital badges are really handy. The HR person can click a button, up pops a little icon, goes to credit, and says, yeah, Tim was certified at this time, this date, and this one expires. Well, that's easy, great. That tends to make it into the handover pile, and if you don't have something easy to look at, it might go to the discard pile. So one of those things is, do take advantage of those digital badges that we offer once you get certified. I'm noticing from a hiring perspective, they're very useful and they're sought after because they're making the hiring side that much easier for other people. There's URL there. Like I said, we have a lot of free courses. edX is one of the areas that we offer our free courses. Our own website, we have free courses as well. I have about 45 free courses on SBOMs and licensing and security and a lot of other cool stuff. In fact, there's a really good thing on security and air gap and for managers. You might want to take that out. One of the people that's on the call here, Rob Slaughter and his team helped us make that course. So we do offer a lot of things. We also offer paid offerings and so forth. But I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm also happy to answer questions or for me, or if you have them for Paul, as the case may be.
Yeah, throw all your questions in chat, throw them in the Q&A. If you want, if Tim and Paul are up for it, you can even raise your hand and I can make you a panelist and you can ask your questions live if we got time. So we've got about 6-7 minutes or so for a few more questions are coming in. And there's no questions come in and I just start dancing. So please let the questions come in.
Well, I kind of want to see Matt dance now.
Here's one for you guys. I'll read it off from John Rahu. I hope I say it right. I can understand business agility, and I believe the technology should deliver on the mission. But what is needed for technical and acquisition agility?
When you say acquisition, it depends on what level you mean. Do you mean by the Individual or by the organization?
Let's start with one.
So if you, as an individual, it's the willingness to learn and do the hard work. There's the resources that are out there. Organizations like mine, we work really hard to make them available and curate them for you. You're not, you don't spend 3 hours on YouTube only to find that the video that worked was 5 years old and that everything's out of date. So finding those champion organizations for the individual is important. We're just one of them. There's lots of organizations out there. I'm obviously getting paid by them, so I'm a big fan. From a organizational standpoint, acquisition is really education. Most, especially in the DoD area, as I mentioned, they're really looking at the old method of, okay, we understand it, it's static, it's locked in, that means we're safe. And it's sort of like saying, yeah, in the age of drones and lightweight anti-tank weapons, the tank isn't as safe as it once was. So we might want something like a Bradley that's a little bit faster, more agile. And it's that kind of approach, and that usually comes through education. You say, yes, it is safe. You can use it. This is the way that it's functional. This is the way that it meets the needs and demands of the mission, whether the mission is to sell widgets or to keep people alive on the battlefield. Usually it's top level. This is general on down, understanding that the old way is no longer the best way.
I'd like to comment a little bit as well. Agility, in some sense, leads to is part of, in the delivery sense, is the ability to try things without an overwhelming amount of investment leading to a lock-in on direction. So pulling that down to very, very, very technical details, if I can, as a software writer, download the source code, build it, try something out on my local machine or local environment, that might be some sort of pre-approved VM, what have you. If I can do that, verify my changes work without affecting anyone else, and then send it up for a verification stage and get that rolled through. There's a process, so you have a process that has rapid feedback, and I really like the what I have heard described as the OODA, the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. Get that as fast and as small as possible. I believe that's an Air Force term originally, and get that really fast, and you can be very agile. But the longer and bigger this loop is at a technical, fundamental level, it's harder and harder to make a change. And this relates to questions around authorization. There's this concept that's coming out in the DoD about continuous authorization, and that gives you an ability to make changes when you have an authorization to adjust and change instead of having to go call someone and say, hey, can I do this? You just do it and you get results then. So
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate that. We're gonna take one last question from Bala before we go. Bala, if you're still there.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, hey guys. Just to clarify my question regarding like the adoption part, right? Like I said, like when it comes to execution with a lot of these things, the DoD just that like anywhere you look at the DoD, they just don't really do it well, right? So I know it was up there was mentioned, I think it was like Jerry, hey, like, yeah, some of the systems are so old that even if we utilize these open source softwares or resources, like it's not going to really do much because some of these systems are so legacy that there's nothing that's compatible with it. So like from there, right, for implementing everything you guys mentioned here into what the DoD is trying to do, how do you go about doing that, right? Like, what's your recommendation? Like, where would you start, right? But like we're in this catch-22 where we need zero trust, but then we need the system to work with the zero trust, right? So I know Paul said you said start small, go big, right? That's what we're trying to do with the Marine Corps Software Factory down in Austin. Start with the Marine Corps Software Factory to do it right with non-legacy equipment, like actual like current emerging technologies. But any recommendations from that?
I do think the senior leadership is starting to get it. I'm hearing IIT-Sec, General Alvin from the Air Force and General something I can't remember for the Space Force. They actually spoke to this very, very topic just a couple hours ago during the keynote. They realized we're behind, we have to modernize, and we have been doing it well. And that I think they're starting to get it, but there's a disconnect because you know it, like the software, I'm in Austin myself, but it's coming from the bottom and the top is just starting to get it. The hardest part of dealing with military and DoD is the middle management. Your sergeants that have been 20 years, what they know works and they don't want to change. So it's going to take continual pressure from both sides to make it happen, but it's going to be a generational change. It's a 10-year change. And hopefully what we can impress upon them is that we're not jumping from one pool to another pool. We're going to jump into a river, and that river will always be moving, and we need to paddle with it. So it's that pool concept that we have to undo, but there is a small change that I'm starting to see, at least from my side. Paul, what are your thoughts?
So it's a really good question. And people in the chat are talking, you have to get leadership, senior leadership to buy it. Absolutely true. But more importantly, I think it's, or just as importantly, part of the buy-in process, I think, is you have to work on the RFP process and say, look, your OEM doesn't want to do what's the current mandate is. So we're going to build in a requirement to the acquisition and say, hey, you can be outdated, but we won't buy it. And figure out how to properly groom that through. That is a big problem. I mean, it makes me sad. It's like, man, we have to modernize, even if it's not a particular way. We have to maintain parity. So I would say be looking at very carefully at the procurement language.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul and Tim, for that. And thanks, Paula, for the great question. And create a lot of engagement in chat too. So I hope you see that. So gentlemen, thank you for the wonderful session today. We are going to cut here in a moment to the next session. I'll leave this open because there's still some chat happening for the next few minutes. But right now, Tim and Paul, thanks again. Really appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having me. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Thank you very
definitely.
much for the opportunity.
Hey, you're welcome.